The ancient stones beneath Kai's claws trembled as another dragon soared overhead, flames dancing perfectly from his jaws in precise spirals. The young bronze dragon pressed himself lower against the academy's training grounds, watching his classmates demonstrate skills that seemed as natural to them as breathing. For 3 years he had tried to master the sacred arts taught at the Dragon Academy on Pyrith, the floating mountain that housed the most prestigious school for dragonkind in the known galaxy. Today marked his final examination, and Kai's stomach churned with familiar dread. Around him, other dragons his age moved with confidence and grace. Blaze, a magnificent red dragon, could melt solid steel with a single breath. Storm, sleek and silver, could fly faster than most spacecraft. Even Quiet Ember, smaller than the rest, could create illusions with her flames that fooled the wisest teachers. Kai looked down at his own bronze scales, dulled by stress and self-doubt. His fire had always been weak, barely hot enough to light kindling. His flying resembled a drunken bird more than a majestic predator. While other dragons spoke eagerly of claiming territories and amassing hordes of treasure, Kai felt no desire for conquest or wealth. The very thoughts that excited his peers left him feeling empty and confused. Elder Draken, the massive golden dragon who led the academy, landed with earth-shaking force in the center of the grounds. His ancient eyes, sharp as cut gems, surveyed the assembled students. When his gaze fell on Kai, the young dragon saw disappointment already written there. The elder had made his opinions clear over the years through subtle comments and increasingly frustrated sighs during training sessions. Today, young ones, you prove yourselves worthy of the title dragon, Elder Draken announced, his voice booming across the mountainside. Each of you will demonstrate mastery of the 3 sacred disciplines: fire control, aerial combat, and territorial dominance. Those who succeed join the ranks of true dragons. Those who fail... He let the words hang in the air like smoke. The tests began with fire control. Each dragon took turns displaying their flame abilities on a series of targets arranged across the grounds. Blaze went first, reducing a massive boulder to molten slag in seconds. The watching students roared approval. Storm followed, using precise flame bursts to carve intricate patterns into stone walls. One by one, each dragon showcased abilities that left the instructors nodding with satisfaction. Finally, Elder Draken's voice cut through the air like a blade. Kai of the Bronze Clan. Kai's legs felt like water as he approached the testing area. The targets stood before him: boulders, metal plates, and ancient training dummies that had withstood centuries of dragon fire. He drew a deep breath, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest that always preceded his attempts at flame control. The other dragons fell silent, though he could hear whispered comments and barely suppressed snickers. He opened his mouth and pushed with all his might. A tiny stream of orange flame sputtered forth, barely reaching the nearest target. The flame danced weakly for a moment before dying completely. The silence that followed felt heavier than the mountain itself. Kai tried again, this time managing a slightly larger flame that lasted perhaps 3 seconds before fading. On his third attempt, desperation took hold. He pushed harder than ever before, trying to force the fire that seemed to mock him daily. The flame burst out in an uncontrolled rush, far larger than any he had ever produced. But instead of hitting the designated targets, it veered wildly to the left, striking the Academy's ancient scroll repository. The irreplaceable texts, some dating back thousands of years, burst into brilliant flames that spread faster than anyone could react. Dragons scrambled to contain the blaze, but several priceless documents had already turned to ash. Kai stood frozen, watching the destruction he had caused. The very scrolls that contained the wisdom he had tried so desperately to learn were now smoke in the wind because of his failure. The irony was not lost on him, nor on anyone else present. Elder Draken's roar of fury shook stones loose from the mountain peaks. Enough! This farce has gone on too long. The ancient dragon's eyes blazed with an anger Kai had never seen before. 3 years we have wasted trying to teach the unteachable. 3 years of hope that perhaps somehow you might develop even the most basic dragon abilities. Today you have proven beyond doubt that you are not and will never be a true dragon. The words hit Kai harder than any physical blow. Around him, his former classmates shifted uncomfortably, but none came to his defense. Why would they? He had just proven Elder Draken's point in the most spectacular way possible. The council has been too patient. Elder Draken continued, his voice now cold and formal. We granted you chance after chance, believing that desire and effort might overcome your obvious deficiencies. We were wrong. A dragon who cannot control his fire is no dragon at all. A dragon who destroys rather than conquers has no place among our kind. Kai wanted to argue, to explain that he had tried harder than anyone knew, that he had spent sleepless nights practicing until his throat was raw and his wings ached. But the evidence of his failure still smoldered behind them, filling the air with the smell of burned knowledge. By the authority of the Dragon Council and the ancient laws of our people, I hereby declare you unfit for Dragon Society, Elder Dragon pronounced. Each word fell like a hammer blow. You are expelled from this academy and banished from all dragon territories. You will go to the lesser realms and live among the inferior species, where perhaps your limitations will not matter as much. The formal nature of the pronouncement made it final and unchangeable. Kai felt something inside him break, not with a sharp crack but with a slow grinding collapse like a mountain slowly crumbling. He had known this day might come, had felt it approaching like a storm on the horizon, but the reality still left him breathless. He looked around at the faces surrounding him, searching for any sign of sympathy or support. He found only embarrassment, relief that they were not in his position, and in some cases barely concealed satisfaction. These dragons, who had shared his classes and dormitories for 3 years, looked at him now like a stranger. Or worse, like a mistake that was finally being corrected. Without a word, Kai spread his wings and launched himself into the sky. His flying was still clumsy and uncertain, but it carried him away from the academy, away from the life he had tried so hard to build. Behind him, he heard Elder Draken addressing the remaining students, probably using his failure as a lesson about the importance of natural ability and proper dragon behavior. As Pyrath grew smaller beneath him, Kai felt the weight of absolute rejection settling over him like a burial shroud. He was alone in the vast galaxy, with no home, no purpose, and no idea where a failed dragon was supposed to go. The stars stretched endlessly before him, cold and unwelcoming as the expressions of his former teachers. For the first time in his life, Kai truly understood what it meant to be utterly alone. Empty space welcomed Kai with the same cold indifference he had felt everywhere since leaving Pyrath. 3 months had passed since his banishment, and the young dragon had discovered that his ability to survive in the vacuum between worlds was perhaps his only truly useful trait. While other species needed ships and life support systems, Kai could simply spread his wings and fly from star to star, though the journeys left him exhausted and more alone than ever. His first stop had been Cognos, the famous mechanical world where artificial intelligences had built a perfect society of gears, circuits, and logical efficiency. The robot inhabitants had analyzed him with scanning beams and declared his organic nature inefficient and unpredictable. They had not been cruel, merely practical in their assessment that he served no useful function in their ordered world. One robot administrator had even suggested that he could be disassembled and studied, though it assured him this was meant as a helpful suggestion rather than a threat. From Cognos, Kai had traveled to Lumina, a crystal planet where beings of pure energy danced through structures of living light. The energy creatures moved faster than thought, communicating in bursts of color and electromagnetic pulses that hurt his eyes to watch. They found his dense, slow physical form amusing but ultimately irrelevant. One had attempted to communicate with him through painful jolts of electricity, apparently trying to speed up his neural processes to match their own. When this failed, they lost interest and left him floating alone among their impossible crystal spires. The water world of Aquatica had seemed more promising. Kai discovered he could hold his breath for remarkable lengths of time, and the aquatic species were initially curious about a visitor who could dive to their deepest cities without mechanical assistance. But their society revolved around complex chemical communications through scent and taste, methods completely foreign to Kai's dragon biology. He had tried to learn their ways, spending weeks in their underwater libraries, but eventually realized he would always be a clumsy outsider, struggling to participate in conversations he could barely detect, let alone understand. Port Nexus, the great trading station where 1,000 species mingled in chaotic commerce, had offered the most hope. Surely in such diversity, there would be a place for one confused dragon. Kai had spent days wandering the massive station's levels, observing the incredible variety of life forms that called the galaxy home. He saw crystalline beings from worlds of ice negotiating with plasma creatures from solar coronas. He watched as fungal networks from underground worlds traded information with hive-minded insect species from gas giants. The market levels fascinated him most. Here, biology meant less than ability. A small, seemingly fragile creature with 6 arms could load cargo faster than most machines. Creatures that looked like living flowers could calculate hyperspace routes that defeated powerful computers. Every species had found their niche, their special contribution to the galaxy's great economy. Kai had approached various merchants and traders, hoping to find work that might suit his unusual combination of abilities. His size and strength seemed promising for cargo handling, but his clumsy movements led to several expensive accidents that left him owing money rather than earning it. His flame abilities might have been useful for welding or metal work, but his lack of control proved dangerous in the station's crowded environment. After accidentally melting a hole through 3 levels of decking while trying to demonstrate his skills, station security had politely but firmly suggested he seek employment elsewhere. The rejection at Port Nexus hurt more than the others, because it had seemed so promising. If he could not find acceptance in a place specifically designed for diversity, where could he possibly belong? Kai began to understand why Elder Dracon had called other species inferior, not because they were less intelligent or capable, but because they all seemed to know their place in the galaxy's grand design while he remained utterly lost. Watching the various species interact, Kai noticed something that both amazed and depressed him. Despite their vast differences, each group had found ways to communicate and cooperate with others. The crystalline beings used light patterns that the plasma creatures could read as heat signatures. The fungal networks released chemical signals that the insect hives interpreted through specialized organs. Everyone had something to offer, some unique perspective or ability that added value to the galactic community. Everyone except him, night after night. As Port Nexus continued its ceaseless activity around him, Kai found himself wondering if Elder Dracon had been right about more than just his unsuitability for dragon society. Perhaps he truly was defective, a mistake in the natural order that would never find its proper place anywhere. The thought grew heavier with each passing day, settling into his bones like a chronic ache. His credits ran low from staying at the station, and eventually Kai knew he had to move on. But where? He had visited worlds of machines, energy, water, and trade. He had seen the galaxy's greatest centers of learning, art, and culture, always as an outsider looking in. The vast space between stars began to seem like the only place he might ever belong. Empty, cold, and impossibly alone. As he prepared to leave Port Nexus for parts unknown, Kai overheard a conversation between 2 traders discussing the galaxy's newer species, those just beginning to explore beyond their homeworlds. One mentioned something called Earth, a planet recently contacted by galactic civilization. The species there, called humans, were apparently still adapting to the knowledge that they were not alone in the universe. Something about the description caught Kai's attention. The traders spoke of humans as if they were somehow unfinished, still figuring out their place in the larger galaxy. For the first time in months, Kai felt a spark of curiosity rather than despair. Perhaps among a species still searching for their identity, a lost dragon might not seem so strange. He had nowhere else to go, and Earth was as good a destination as any other. At least there, he might find others who understood what it felt like to be uncertain of their place in the galaxy's grand design. With nothing left to lose, Kai spread his wings and launched himself toward the coordinates the traders had mentioned, hoping that perhaps among the lost he might finally find something resembling home. The journey would take him far from the busy trade routes and established worlds he had been visiting. Earth lay in what galactic maps marked as a quiet sector, recently open to interstellar contact but still relatively isolated. As the stars shifted around him during his long flight, Kai allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to meet a species that, like him, was still trying to understand where they belonged in the universe. Rain fell softly on the small human town as Kai circled high above, studying the strange new world below. Earth looked nothing like the grand civilizations he had visited over the past months. No crystal spires reaching toward space, no floating cities, no massive trade stations humming with the activity of 1,000 species. Just simple buildings scattered across green landscapes connected by ribbons of paved roads, where small vehicles moved like insects. The simplicity was oddly comforting. After the overwhelming complexity of galactic civilization, Earth felt peaceful, almost primitive. Kai had learned that humans were indeed one of the galaxy's newest species, having only discovered they were not alone a few short years ago. Most of their world remained untouched by advanced technology, with only a few major cities showing signs of galactic contact. This particular town seemed especially quiet. Kai chose it precisely because it appeared forgotten by the larger universe, a place where he might observe these humans without attracting attention. He landed in a forest outside the settlement, folding his wings and using his natural ability to remain perfectly still. Dragons were excellent at patience when they chose to be, and Kai had learned to appreciate the skill during his lonely travels. From his hidden position, he watched the daily routines of human life unfold. Adults left their homes in the morning, traveling to various places where they apparently performed work of some kind. Young humans, smaller versions that seemed to be their offspring, gathered at a large building that Kai deduced was some sort of learning facility. The entire process repeated with remarkable consistency day after day. What struck Kai most was how fragile they seemed. Dragons were built for survival in any environment, but humans required clothing to protect them from weather, vehicles to travel distances that Kai could cover easily on foot, and seemed to need frequent consumption of food and water. Yet despite their apparent weaknesses, they had somehow developed space travel and earned recognition from galactic civilization. The contradiction intrigued him. On his third day of observation, Kai noticed something that made his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. One of the small houses near the edge of town caught his attention, because only 2 humans lived there, unlike the larger groups he had observed elsewhere. A female adult and a young offspring who rarely left the building. When they did venture out, the adult moved with obvious exhaustion while the small one seemed weak and unsteady. The female human was working. Kai watched as she left early each morning for one location, returned briefly at midday, then departed again for a different place, not returning until well after dark. Even from his distant position, he could see the weariness in her movements, the way she seemed to carry invisible weight that grew heavier each day. Curiosity eventually overcame caution. Late one evening, while the female was away at her second job, Kai crept closer to their dwelling. Through a window, he saw the small human lying on soft furnishings, surrounded by strange devices and containers of what appeared to be medicines. The child looked pale and thin, obviously suffering from some illness that Kai's dragon senses could detect as a wrongness in her biological patterns. Something about the scene struck him deeply. Here was a being caring for another with the same fierce devotion he had seen in dragon parents protecting their young, but without any of the physical strength or natural advantages that dragons possessed. The female human was fighting an impossible battle against circumstances beyond her control, using nothing but determination and love. The child stirred, and Kai froze. Large brown eyes opened and fixed directly on him through the window. For a moment, neither moved. Kai expected fear, screaming, perhaps a call for help. Instead, the young human smiled weakly and lifted one small hand in what he somehow understood was a greeting gesture. Unable to resist, Kai carefully placed one clawed finger against the glass. The child pressed her palm against the same spot from the inside, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with words or species, or the vast differences in their biology. It was simple recognition, one lonely being acknowledging another. The child gestured for him to come around to a larger opening in the wall. Against his better judgment, Kai found himself carefully squeezing through what humans called a door, marveling at how these creatures built their shelters with such small entrances. Inside, the dwelling was warm and filled with scents he did not recognize but somehow found comforting. "You're a dragon," the child said, her voice barely above a whisper but filled with wonder rather than fear. "I've read about dragons in my books, but I never thought I'd meet a real one." Kai found himself sitting very carefully on the floor, trying to take up as little space as possible in the cramped human dwelling. "You're not afraid?" he asked, surprised by how easily the words came. Dragons were natural linguists, able to learn any language quickly, but he had never spoken to such a young being before. "Should I be?" she asked with the directness that Kai was learning characterized young humans. "You don't look scary. You look sad." The observation caught him off guard. Months of rejection and failure had left their mark, and apparently even a sick human child could see it. "I suppose I am sad," he admitted. "I have no home, no purpose. I wander from world to world but belong nowhere." "I understand," the child said simply. "I can't go to school like other kids or play outside much or do lots of things because I'm sick. Sometimes I feel like I don't belong either." Before Kai could respond, the sound of the female human returning sent him scrambling toward the door, but the child called out weakly, "Mom, don't be scared, but we have a visitor." The female human entered the main room and stopped dead, her eyes wide with shock and fear. Kai tried to make himself smaller, more harmless, but there was only so much a bronze dragon could do to appear non-threatening in a human-sized room. "Please don't hurt her," the female said, her voice steady despite her obvious terror. She stepped between Kai and the child without hesitation, armed with nothing but parental determination. "I would never harm your offspring," Kai said quickly. "She is not afraid of me, and I find myself curious about your kind." The tension in the room remained thick for several long moments. Then the child spoke up from behind her mother. "His name is Kai, Mom. He's lost, like when I get confused about where I am when I'm really sick. Maybe we could help him find his way." The female human looked back and forth between her daughter and the dragon filling her living room. Kai could see the struggle in her eyes, fear warring with something else, perhaps recognition of the same loneliness her daughter had identified. Finally, exhaustion seemed to win over caution. "I'm Rachel," she said, not relaxing but no longer actively preparing to fight. "This is my daughter Lucy, and you're really a dragon." "A failed dragon," Kai corrected automatically, then wondered why he felt compelled to share that detail. "I was banished from my people for being unable to master our ways. I have been wandering ever since, searching for a place where someone like me might belong." Rachel studied him for a long moment, and Kai found himself hoping desperately that she would not ask him to leave. Something about this small dwelling and its 2 inhabitants felt more like home than any place he had been since leaving Pyrith. "Well," Rachel said finally, sinking into a chair with obvious exhaustion, "I suppose if you're not going to eat us, you might as well stay for a while. Heaven knows we could use some help, and Lucy doesn't get many visitors." Lucy smiled brightly, the first truly happy expression Kai had seen from her. "Can you really breathe fire?" she asked. "The books say dragons can breathe fire," Kai demonstrated with a small, carefully controlled flame that he shaped into a dancing flower in the air above his palm. For the first time in his life, his weak fire magic earned gasps of delight instead of disappointment. Maybe, he thought, power was less important than knowing how to use what you had. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as Kai carefully measured his flame to heat Rachel's morning beverage to the perfect temperature. 2 weeks had passed since that first night when Lucy had welcomed him into their home, and the bronze dragon had discovered that his gentle fire control, once a source of shame, was perfectly suited for dozens of small household tasks. He could warm food without burning it, provide heat during power outages, and even help dry laundry faster than any human appliance. Rachel still jumped slightly when he moved too quickly, but her fear had gradually been replaced by something Kai had never experienced before: genuine appreciation. Not for what he might become or what he should be able to do, but for exactly what he was capable of right now. It was a revolutionary concept for a dragon raised to believe that only maximum power had value. "The heating bill is going to be so much lower this month," Rachel said, accepting the perfectly warmed cup with a grateful smile. "I can't remember the last time the house stayed this comfortable without costing a fortune." Kai felt a warm satisfaction that had nothing to do with his flame abilities. He had quickly learned that Rachel worked 2 jobs to support herself and Lucy, struggling to pay for medical treatments and basic necessities. His contribution might be small, but it made a real difference in their daily lives. For the first time since leaving the Dragon Academy, he felt useful. Lucy shuffled into the kitchen, moving slowly but managing a bright smile when she saw Kai coiled carefully in the corner, trying to take up as little space as possible. Her illness had good days and bad days, and Kai had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated which type of day lay ahead. Today seemed to be somewhere in the middle. "Can you read to me after Mom goes to work?" Lucy asked, settling into her chair with the careful movements of someone much older than her years. "I started a new book about space exploration, and I want to know if the parts about dragons are accurate." Kai nodded, another task that had surprised him with its importance. Lucy loved stories, especially ones that took her far from her sickbed to distant worlds and impossible adventures. Kai's deep voice and natural storytelling abilities, developed during dragon oral tradition training, made him an excellent reader. He could add dramatic flair to exciting scenes and gentle comfort to sad parts, adjusting his performance to Lucy's energy level. "I have to cover a double shift for someone today," Rachel said, apologizing as she always did when work demands kept her away longer. "Will you be okay here with Kai?" The question had been purely rhetorical the first few times she asked it, but now Kai realized she genuinely trusted him with her daughter's care. The responsibility filled him with purpose in a way that dragon hoarding instincts never had. Protecting Lucy felt more important than claiming territory or accumulating treasure. After Rachel left, Kai settled beside Lucy's bed, opening the book to where they had stopped the previous day. But before he could begin reading, Lucy looked at him with the direct gaze that he had learned meant she was thinking about something serious. "Kai, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," he replied, setting the book aside. Over the past weeks, Lucy had become his closest friend, the first being to know his complete story without judging him for it. "Do you miss being with other dragons? I mean, I know they were mean to you, but don't you miss having people who are like you around?" The question touched on something Kai had been struggling with since arriving on Earth. "I thought I would miss it more than I do," he admitted. "I spent so long trying to fit in with Dragon Society that I never questioned whether it was where I actually wanted to be. Being here with you and your mother feels more right than anything I experienced at the academy." Lucy nodded thoughtfully. "I think I understand. Before I got really sick, I used to worry about fitting in at school and having friends like everyone else. But now I think maybe it's more important to find people who care about you for who you are, even if there aren't very many of them." Her wisdom often surprised Kai. Despite her youth and illness, Lucy seemed to understand complex emotional truths that had escaped him for years. Perhaps facing challenges early in life taught beings to see what really mattered. Their conversation was interrupted by a neighbor, knocking at the door, Mrs. Henderson. From next door often checked on Lucy when Rachel was working, but today she seemed agitated about something. "Lucy, dear, is your mother home?" the elderly woman asked, then stopped short when she saw Kai. Despite living next door for 2 weeks, she still seemed startled by his presence. "Oh, hello, Kai. Mom's at work," Lucy explained. "Is something wrong?" Mrs. Henderson hesitated, clearly uncomfortable discussing adult problems in front of a child, but apparently deciding that a dragon counted as adequate supervision. "It's the Hendersons down the street. Their house caught fire last night and the family is staying at the community center. But the father is a construction worker, and he can't work until they fix the damage to his tools and equipment. The insurance company is being difficult." Kai listened with growing interest. During his time on Earth, he had learned that humans often faced problems that his abilities could easily solve, but social conventions prevented him from offering help to strangers. This situation seemed different. "What kind of damage?" he asked carefully. "The fire started in their garage workshop," Mrs. Henderson explained. "It damaged a lot of expensive equipment that he needs for his job. Some of it just needs repairs, but they can't afford to take it to a shop, and the family doesn't have the skills to fix complex machinery." Kai's mind began working through possibilities. His flame control was precise enough for delicate metalwork, and his strength could handle heavy repairs. More importantly, his dragon heritage included instinctive understanding of mechanical systems, a skill that had seemed useless compared to the combat abilities his peers mastered. "I could help," he said quietly, "if they would accept assistance from someone like me." Mrs. Henderson looked surprised, then thoughtful. "You know, they might. Jim Henderson is practical above all else, and he's desperate to get back to work. Let me talk to him." That afternoon, Kai found himself in a fire-damaged garage, carefully examining tools and equipment that represented one human's entire livelihood. Jim Henderson was a large, weathered man who had accepted Kai's offer with the straightforward attitude of someone with no other options. "Most of this just needs careful welding," Jim explained, pointing to various pieces of bent and damaged metal. "But I can't afford shop rates, and the insurance adjuster won't return my calls." Kai studied the damage with growing confidence. This was work that played to his strengths rather than highlighting his weaknesses. His flame could provide precisely controlled heat for repairs. His claws could manipulate small parts with surprising delicacy, and his natural durability meant he could work with materials that would be dangerous for humans. For the next several hours, Kai carefully restored damaged tools, straightened bent metal, and repaired equipment with a precision that amazed both himself and Jim. His weak flames, so inadequate for dragon combat, were perfect for metalwork that required finesse rather than raw power. "I've never seen welding that clean," Jim said, examining a repaired piece with obvious admiration. "You've got a real talent for this work." Talent. The word hit Kai like a physical blow, but in the best possible way. Never in his life had anyone suggested he had talent for anything. He had spent so long focusing on his failures that he had never considered his unique combination of abilities might be valuable in different contexts. When he returned home that evening, Lucy was waiting with obvious excitement. "Mrs. Henderson told me what you did. She said you saved Mr. Henderson's job." "I just helped with some repairs," Kai said modestly, but inside he felt a warm glow of accomplishment. "It's more than that," Lucy insisted with her usual directness. You used your dragon abilities to help someone who needed it. That's what heroes do in all the best stories. Hero, another word that had never been applied to Kai before. As he settled in for their evening reading session, he reflected on how much his life had changed since arriving on Earth. He was still a failed dragon by the standards of his people, but perhaps those standards were not the only measure of worth in the galaxy. Here, surrounded by beings who valued kindness over conquest, gentleness over power, he was beginning to discover who he might really be. The news arrived on what had started as Lucy's best day in months. She had eaten a full breakfast, managed to walk around the house without exhaustion, and was eagerly planning a short trip to the garden to see the flowers Kai had been describing to her. Rachel hummed while preparing for work, and even Kai felt optimistic as he helped with morning tasks around the house. Then the emergency broadcast interrupted regular programming on their communication device. Rachel froze with her work bag half-packed as the announcer's serious voice filled the room. A galactic plague had begun spreading through multiple star systems, affecting dozens of different species with a virulent biological agent that adapted to each victim's unique physiology. Several worlds had already been quarantined, cutting them off from galactic civilization until a cure could be developed. Kai felt ice forming in his stomach as the broadcast continued. The plague was particularly dangerous for species with compromised immune systems, and early reports suggested that younger individuals were at higher risk than adults. Lucy's already fragile health made her extremely vulnerable to any new pathogen. Earth has been classified as a high-risk world due to humanity's recent integration into galactic society, the announcer continued. Galactic Health Authority vessels have established a quarantine perimeter around the planet, effective immediately. No ships will be permitted to enter or leave Earth space until further notice. Rachel sank into her chair, her face pale with understanding. The quarantine meant no access to advanced galactic medical technology. No shipments of specialized medicines, no emergency evacuation to better-equipped worlds. Earth's own medical facilities, while improving since galactic contact, were still centuries behind the standards available elsewhere. Lucy, despite her youth, grasped the implications quickly. The really good hospitals are all on other planets, aren't they? She asked quietly. The ones that might be able to help me if I get sick? Kai watched Rachel struggle to find words that would comfort her daughter without lying about their situation. The truth was stark and simple. If the plague reached Earth, Lucy's chances of survival were minimal. Her compromised immune system could not handle additional stress, and Earth's medical facilities lacked the advanced treatments that might save her. Over the following days, the situation grew worse. Reports came in of the plague spreading faster than anticipated, jumping between star systems despite quarantine efforts. The pathogen seemed to adapt and evolve with each new host species, making it nearly impossible to develop effective treatments. Even the galaxy's most advanced civilizations were struggling to contain its spread. Rachel worked frantically, trying to find any option that might protect Lucy. She contacted every medical facility on Earth, researched experimental treatments, and even attempted to communicate with galactic health authorities. But the quarantine was absolute, and Earth's resources were simply inadequate for the challenge they faced. Lucy grew weaker as stress took its toll on her already fragile system. The knowledge that help existed but was unreachable seemed to drain her strength faster than any physical illness. Kai spent hours by her bedside, reading stories and providing gentle warmth. But he could see the light fading from her eyes day by day. There has to be something, Rachel said one evening, pacing the small living room with desperate energy. The plague hasn't reached Earth yet. Maybe if we could somehow get Lucy to one of the worlds that's still safe, somewhere with advanced medical facilities. The quarantine makes that impossible, Kai said gently, hating to destroy her hope but knowing that false comfort would help no one. No ships are permitted to leave Earth's atmosphere. But you're not a ship, Lucy said from her bed, her voice weak but her mind still sharp. You can fly in space without a spacecraft. Could you carry someone to another world? The suggestion hit Kai like a thunderbolt. Dragons were indeed capable of interstellar flight, using abilities that most other species required technology to replicate. He had traveled from world to world under his own power, something he had taken for granted as simply part of his nature. But carrying passengers, especially fragile human passengers, across the vast distances between stars was an entirely different challenge. The journey to the nearest advanced medical facility would take weeks, he said slowly, thinking through the logistics. Haven is the closest world with facilities that might help Lucy, but it's almost at the limit of my flight endurance. And carrying passengers while flying through space. He trailed off, realizing he had no idea if it was even possible. But you could try? Rachel asked, hope and desperation warring in her voice. If Lucy gets worse, if the plague reaches Earth, would you be willing to attempt it? Kai looked at Lucy, so small and fragile in her bed, and felt something shift inside him. All his life he had been told that his flying was inadequate, his endurance poor compared to other dragons. He had accepted those judgments without question, using them as more evidence of his fundamental failure as a dragon. But those standards had been based on dragon competitions and displays, not life-or-death missions with precious cargo. I would try, he said simply. I cannot promise success, but I would try. The next few days brought the news they had been dreading. The plague had been detected in the outer system, carried by refugee ships that had fled other infected worlds. Despite quarantine protocols, the pathogen was adapting to space-based transmission methods. Earth's infection was no longer a possibility, but an inevitability. Lucy's condition deteriorated rapidly as stress and fear weakened her already compromised immune system. Rachel made the impossible decision that every parent hopes never to face: risk everything on a desperate chance, or accept the unacceptable. We have to try, she said, holding Lucy close while tears streamed down her face. Even if the journey is dangerous, it's more hope than we have here. Kai had spent the intervening time researching everything he could about the journey to Haven. The medical world was at the absolute limit of his flight range, requiring him to push his endurance beyond anything he had attempted before. The route would take them through asteroid fields, past solar storms, and around quarantine patrol ships that might try to stop them. Worse, he would be carrying 2 passengers who could not survive in space without protection. Dragons could create a limited atmospheric field around themselves, but extending it to cover others while maintaining the energy needed for interstellar flight would tax his abilities. Beyond their known limits, I've never attempted anything like this, he admitted to Rachel as they prepared for departure. My dragon training focused on individual flight, not passenger transport. I don't know if my atmospheric generation can protect you for the entire journey. We understand the risks, Rachel said firmly. Without this chance, Lucy has no future anyway. Whatever happens, at least we'll be fighting for her instead of just waiting. Lucy, despite her weakness, managed to smile. Besides, she said, how many people get to fly through space with a real dragon? Even if it doesn't work, it'll be the best adventure ever. Her courage humbled Kai completely. Here was a young being facing possible death with more bravery than he had shown when facing mere academic failure. If Lucy could be brave, then he could find the strength to attempt the impossible. As they prepared to leave Earth's atmosphere under cover of darkness, Kai felt the weight of absolute responsibility settling on his shoulders. 2 lives depended on abilities he had never tested to their limits. On endurance he was not sure he possessed. On courage he had never been required to demonstrate. For the first time since leaving the Dragon Academy, Kai understood what it truly meant to be tested. This was not about proving his worth to judges or earning approval from teachers. This was about love, sacrifice, and the willingness to risk everything for those who mattered most. The stars awaited them, cold and distant, but no longer empty. Somewhere among them lay Haven and hope, and the chance to save a life worth more to Kai than all the dragon treasures in the galaxy. Space had never felt more hostile as Kai stretched his wings against the cosmic void, every muscle straining to maintain the delicate atmospheric bubble that kept Rachel and Lucy alive. They rode in a specially constructed harness that Rachel had designed from materials in their home, padded and secured to distribute weight evenly across Kai's back. The bronze dragon had never carried passengers before, and the additional mass made every wing beat an effort that sent tremors through his entire body. 3 days into their journey, Kai's endurance was already being tested beyond any limit he had known. The route to Haven required navigating around a patrol fleet maintaining Earth's quarantine, then threading through the asteroid belt of Kepler, a field of space debris that stretched for millions of kilometers. His usual interstellar travel had always involved direct paths and rest stops on uninhabited worlds, luxuries they could not afford with Lucy's rapidly deteriorating condition. "How are you holding up?" Rachel asked, her voice muffled by the emergency breathing apparatus they had improvised before departure. She had to speak loudly to be heard over the constant rush of wind that Kai generated to maintain their life-sustaining atmosphere. "I am managing," Kai replied, though the truthful answer would have been far less encouraging. His flame chambers ached from the constant energy output required to heat their atmospheric bubble. His wings felt like lead weights that grew heavier with each stroke. The navigation skills he had barely learned at the Dragon Academy were being pushed to their absolute limits as he calculated trajectories through hazardous space, while exhausted and carrying precious cargo. Lucy had been unconscious for most of the second day, her small body conserving energy for the fight against her illness. When she did wake, she managed brave smiles and words of encouragement that broke Kai's heart with their fierce optimism. Rachel monitored her daughter's vital signs with a medical scanner they had borrowed from Earth's limited supplies, watching numbers that grew more concerning with each passing hour. The asteroid field presented their first major crisis. Kai's usual method of navigating such obstacles involved quick bursts of speed and agile maneuvering that would be impossible while protecting passengers. Instead, he was forced to find a careful path through the slowly tumbling rocks, using minimal movements that conserved energy but stretched the journey's duration. Halfway through the field, a piece of debris struck them with enough force to tear a small hole in Kai's wing membrane. The injury sent shockwaves of pain through his entire system, but worse was the immediate destabilization of their atmospheric field. Oxygen began leaking into space faster than Kai could replenish it. "Hold on," he managed to say through gritted teeth, pouring more energy into maintaining their life support while simultaneously trying to heal the wing damage. Dragons possessed remarkable regenerative abilities, but healing required energy that Kai desperately needed for flight. The choice was immediate and stark: heal himself properly and risk their atmosphere failing, or maintain life support and fly injured for the remainder of their journey. There was no real choice. Kai sealed the wing tear with just enough healing energy to stop the atmospheric leak, leaving the deeper damage unrepaired. Flying with the injury felt like someone driving nails through his bones with every wing beat, but Rachel and Lucy continued breathing. "The medical scanner shows Haven's broadcast beacon," Rachel reported on their fourth day. "We're almost there." Almost was a relative term when measured against Kai's diminishing reserves. His body was running on determination alone, every system pushed far beyond safe limits. The atmospheric generation that had seemed so effortless during short demonstrations now felt like holding back an ocean with bare claws. His navigation was becoming increasingly erratic as exhaustion clouded his judgment. Haven appeared before them like a jewel against the void, its surface covered with the gleaming domes and spires of advanced medical facilities. But as they approached the planet's orbital traffic control zone, automated messages began broadcasting warnings about quarantine restrictions and plague protocols. "Unidentified biological entity, you are entering restricted space," came the sterile voice of Haven's traffic control system. "Please identify yourself and state your medical emergency status." Kai struggled to formulate a response that would not result in their immediate expulsion. Haven was accepting plague refugees, but only under strict protocols that required advance clearance and certified health status. They had neither. "This is Kai of the Bronze Clan," he transmitted, using the formal dragon identification protocols he had learned at the Academy. "I carry 2 human passengers from the quarantined world Earth. One is a juvenile with critical medical needs who will die without immediate treatment." The silence that followed stretched for agonizing minutes. Kai could feel Rachel's tension as they waited for a response that would determine Lucy's fate. When the reply finally came, it carried the cold efficiency of bureaucratic policy. "Dragon Transport, your passengers do not have proper medical clearance for entry to Haven. Please proceed to Quarantine Station Beta 7 for processing and evaluation. Estimated processing time is 7 to 14 standard days." 7 to 14 days. Lucy did not have 7 hours, let alone days. Kai felt something crystallize inside him. A core of absolute determination that had nothing to do with dragon pride or academic achievement. This was about love, pure and simple. And love did not accept bureaucratic delays when a child's life hung in the balance. "Traffic control, the juvenile passenger requires immediate treatment," Kai transmitted. "I am willing to surrender myself for medical research in exchange for emergency care. Dragon biology has significant research value for plague studies." Another pause, then a different voice, older and more thoughtful. "Dragon pilot, this is Dr. Williams of Haven Medical Research. Did you say you would donate biological samples for our plague research?" "I offer more than samples," Kai replied, the decision forming as he spoke. "Dragons have natural immunity to most biological threats. You may study my complete physiology. If it will help develop treatments for the plague, all I ask is immediate care for my passengers." The negotiation that followed tested Kai's diplomatic skills as thoroughly as the journey had tested his physical abilities. Dragon biology was indeed valuable to medical researchers, especially in the context of plague immunity studies. Kai's willingness to submit to extensive medical examination in exchange for Lucy's treatment represented an unprecedented opportunity for Haven's scientists. "Very well, Dragon Pilot," Dr. Williams finally replied. "Proceed directly to Medical Bay Alpha. Emergency teams are standing by." The landing at Haven's medical facility required the last reserves of Kai's strength. His legs nearly buckled as they touched the docking platform, and only supreme effort kept him upright long enough for medical teams to carefully remove Rachel and Lucy from their harness. As soon as his passengers were safe, Kai collapsed, his body finally succumbing to days of impossible strain. He awoke in a medical chamber designed for large alien species, connected to monitoring devices that tracked his vital signs and recovery progress. Through a transparent wall, he could see Lucy in an adjacent treatment room, surrounded by advanced medical equipment that was already beginning to stabilize her condition. "She's responding well to treatment," Dr. Williams said, entering Kai's chamber with a datapad full of test results. "The advanced immunotherapy protocols are exactly what she needed. Another day or two of delay and—" He did not finish the sentence, but Kai understood. "And my part of the bargain?" Kai asked, though he felt no regret about the agreement. "Your immune system is remarkable," the doctor replied with obvious excitement. "The antibodies in your blood show resistance to the plague pathogen that we've never seen before. With your permission, we'd like to use your immunity factors to develop new treatments. This could be the breakthrough we need to end the plague." Over the following weeks, as Lucy recovered her strength and Rachel watched with tears of joy, Kai submitted to countless medical tests and procedures. The researchers studied his immune responses, analyzed his cellular structure, and developed new treatment protocols based on dragon biology. His contribution led directly to breakthroughs that would save millions of lives across the galaxy. News of Kai's journey spread through galactic medical networks, then beyond into general galactic communications. The story of a failed dragon who had risked everything to save one human child resonated across species barriers. Messages of support and admiration arrived from worlds Kai had never heard of, from species he had never encountered. Even more surprising was a formal communication from the Dragon Council on Pyrith. Elder Draken's voice, transmitted across the vast distances of space, carried tones Kai had never heard from the ancient dragon before. "Kai of the Bronze Clan," the message began. "Your actions have brought honor to dragonkind in ways that no academic achievement could match. The Council formally recognizes your status as a true dragon, with all rights and privileges restored. However, we understand if you choose to remain where you have found purpose." The irony was not lost on Kai. The recognition he had once desperately wanted now mattered far less than the small hand that gripped his claw as Lucy read him stories about brave dragons who helped those in need. Rachel's gratitude, Lucy's friendship, and the knowledge that his unique abilities had saved lives meant more than all the dragon traditions he had failed to master. "I think I'll stay here," he told Rachel as they prepared to return to Earth. "If that's acceptable to you and Lucy." "Stay?" Rachel laughed, the sound bright with happiness. "Kai, your family. Where else would you go?" Family. The word carried weight and meaning that no dragon horde could match. As they prepared for the journey home, Kai reflected on the strange path that had led him from the heights of Pyreth to this moment. He had failed to become the dragon his people expected, but he had become something perhaps more valuable: a guardian, a friend, and proof that strength came in many forms. The stars no longer seemed cold and empty as they began their flight back to Earth. They were filled with possibilities, connections, and the warm knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy, a failed dragon had found his true purpose in the simple act of loving and protecting those who needed him most.